All right, well, rights activists are praising Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema for scrapping the death penalty, criticizing the country's leaders also no longer a punishable offence. Hichilema had promised he would abolish the colonial-era laws if his party takes over. So for more on this, we're now joined by Zambian historian Sishuwa Sishuwa. Mr. Sishuwa, thank you so much for your time and good morning to you. I think let's talk about the controversial defamation law as well, which I understand Zambia has repealed. Let's unpack what actually it meant before this repeal.
Well, the law on defamation of the president was used by successive incumbents in Zambia since 1965, when it was created, which was a year after Zambia's independence, to suppress free speech and media freedom. So a number of Zambians were arrested and charged under that law and imprisoned for several years. It carried a sentence of 3 years imprisonment, hard labor, and even under Hichilema himself, since he became president in August last year, ordinary Zambians and political leaders were charged, and some of them many of them have been convicted and are serving prison sentences as we speak.
So this repeal, what exactly does it mean? Is it a victory for Zambia?
It's a good move for Zambia's democracy and for human rights, particularly in relation to free speech and media freedom. And I think that it's a significant step forward in relation to Hichilema's commitment to the ideals of democracy and protection of human rights. But it's just one of the many laws that needs to be taken off the statutes. The other one is the Cybersecurity and Cybercrimes Act, which was enacted by the previous administration on the eve of last year's elections to suppress free speech. But that law also violates the right to privacy. And Hichilema committed himself to repealing this law as his first act in office if elected. It's 16 months down the line. He's yet to touch it. So I do hope that the praise that he's getting both in Zambia and outside Zambia will not obscure him from the need to repeal this law that should have been repealed by now, because you don't need 16 months to take off a bad law, off the statutes. And that's why, even under Hichilema, for example, several Zambians were sent to jail because of the delayed institutional reforms. The other law is the Public Order Act. Again, this has been used to suppress the right to public assembly, mainly in relation to the activities of civil society and opposition parties. This is another law, again, which Hichilema committed himself to reviewing, and we hope that he can move fairly quickly to realize that promise. And then you have the Access to Information law. It has been promised by successive Zambian administration over the last 30 years. Hichilema committed himself to giving Zambians an access to information law. Again, this is an important law that enhances government transparency, that makes corruption easier to observe. He's silent. And so I do hope that in the new year, one of the promises that Hichilema is going to realize is giving Zambians the access to information law, reviewing the Public Order Act, passing the Public Order Act, and repealing the Cybersecurity and Cybercrimes Act.
From a more political point of view, since the opposition National Democratic Party leader, Saboy Mbwela, who has been arrested multiple times, we understand, under this defamation law, warned and cautions Zambians from celebrating too early when it comes to the abolishment of the law. She urged Zambians to still exercise caution. And I just want to quote him here, Mr. Sishuwa, if you may allow me. She, of course, noted, as you've just mentioned, the existence of the cybersecurity laws still as a concern, restricting freedom of expression, but also saying, and I quote, "I see a situation whereby they're going to use any laws whatsoever to ensure that they get to the political opponents, so the people in Zambia should not even feel comfortable." What's your view on this point here, of course, by Saboy?
I think it remains to be seen. Even the penal code that was amended recently to remove the defamation of the president provision, it still contains punitive provisions that criminalize insults. But what remains to be seen is whether the state would use some of these provisions that remain to actually arrest critics or opponents of the ruling party on a similar charges. Because what you don't want is is reform without change. And that can only be tested, for example, when the opposition leaders like Savoy and others who are arrested under the repealed law begin to exercise their right to free speech and see if the government is actually going to move for them. I think Hichilema should also move fairly quickly to pardon people who were convicted under his leadership after they were charged using the repealed law. There are several of them who are still appearing in court, for example, and the court process have to be completed. And if they are convicted, I think he should show that commitment to human rights and democracy by pardoning anyone who is convicted under that terrible law. Because it's important to acknowledge the fact that these people were convicted under this bad law because he delayed to enact these institutional reforms. But Savoy is correct to say maybe we should be a little bit cautious. We should see how the government implements the remaining provision, the penal code. We should see how the government, whether the government is really committed to opening up the civic space and the political space for people to exercise their right of free speech, which is often also accompanied by the right to public assembly and vice versa. The 2023 will show us whether Hichilema's government or administration is really committed to living by the example that they have shown by repealing these penalty provisions, which is commendable.
Right. I think another significant repeal that we have to make mention of definitely has to be the death penalty being repealed, this being made announced rather in a statement by Hichilema on Friday as well. I mean, I understand, according to reports, Zambia's last execution took place in 1997. However, as of 2021, there were still some 250 people still on death row with 9 new sentences. With this repeal now, what does it mean then for those who are still on death row?
I think they were convicted at the time when the death penalty was still in force. It's very likely that they will still serve life sentences because, as you said, no Zambian leader has enforced the death penalty since the 1990s, and that is part of this movement towards the repeal of the death penalty across the world. And even though it was one of the statutes, it was in effect a life imprisonment sentence because no leader executed it. And I don't think that will change for those who are convicted under the repealed law. I think, again, this is another area where Hichilema is to be commended because these are low-hanging fruits that he could have done much, much earlier. We saw similar movements in Malawi, even though in the case of Malawi, the death sentence is still applicable to certain offences. It's not mandatory, but it's applicable to certain offences. Again, even in Malawi, we saw a situation where the defamation of the president law was repealed, I think, last month on the 29th of November by members of parliament. It remains for Brothers Chakwera to assent to it. But we are seeing in the region, I think, this broader movement towards institutional reform that promote democracy and enhance and protection of human rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we'll have to leave it there. And I appreciate you, of course, joining me and discussing this with me, Mr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, Zambian historian. Thank you so much for your time.